Um, so those of you that are watching, hello. Welcome to our talk by Brother Guy Consolmagno and Dr. Dan Davis, Turning Left at Orion. What I'd like to do is read a quick bio. You'll be able to find it on the page, but for our esteemed guests, our speakers here, we'll start with Brother Guy Consolmagno, who's director of the Vatican Observatory and president of the Vatican Observatory Foundation. He's a native of Detroit, Michigan, graduated from U of D High 70 in 70. He earned an undergraduate and master's degree from MIT and a PhD in planetary science from the University of Arizona. He was a postdoctoral research fellow at Harvard and MIT, served in the U.S. Peace Corps, went to Kenya, and taught university physics at Lafayette College before entering into the Jesuits in 1989, which is why we affectionately call him Brother Guy. Along with more than 200 scientific publications, he's the author of a number of popular astronomy books besides Turn Left at Orion. Most recently, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? With Father Paul Muller Sr. So now to quickly introduce Dr. Dan Davis, he's a professor of geophysics at Stony Brook University. His primary area of research specialization is the tectonics of regions where plates converge, causing great earthquakes and the construction of mountain belts. Other areas of research include the application of geophysics to nuclear arms control and to the study of glacial and post-glacial geology. Dan is a lifelong stargazer, as are the rest of us. And although during the daytime, his attention is focused downward towards the earth, that changes after dark. So with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Brother Guy and Dan Davis. Take it away.
Great to have you here. We're basically going to be talking about the book we wrote, Turn Left at Orion. And it's been a great trip, a strange trip, a long, strange journey. We've gone through 5 editions now with a number of different covers over the years. And last year we came out with the 5th and we'll hope last for a while edition because we're kind of exhausted. And to start out, we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. This is us at the time we were working on the book. I'm the fellow with the beard to the left. He's the fellow who didn't have the beard to the right. But you can see me back when I was in the Peace Corps in Kenya in 1984. And the story, in some ways, of the book starts in Kenya in 84, but our own personal stories start a lot earlier than that. And Dan?
So that little cartoon of me sort of dates me and says a lot. You notice my foot is resting on an original Apple Macintosh, the kind from the famous Super Bowl ad. And that's a picture of me as a young, brown-haired faculty member at Stony Brook with a grad student who I inherited from Guy, who'd been an undergrad studying with Guy at Lafayette College.
Well, my first telescope was something that was almost as good as this Tasco. Rather than buying it in a department store, I got it using trading stamps. It was, a 60 centimeter aperture refractor, and it was great for looking at the moon and looking at a few objects that I kind of knew to look at. I had more fun taking it apart and destroying the coatings on the lenses by washing them and doing all sorts of terrible things than I probably had actually looking through it. But it certainly fed my love of astronomy.
For me, I grew up in an urban area. I was just a couple of blocks north of the Bronx. There wasn't a lot you could see, but you could see planets and the moon and brighter objects if you only had a telescope. Well, thanks to the Yonkers Herald-Statesman newspaper, which needed paper boys, I was able to earn money that went towards buying what many of you who are of a certain age will remember as the telescope of the time, a lovely F15 2.4-inch refractor by Unitron. I still have this beast. It's still sitting there in my garage. And in fact, I now own 4 Unitrons among my gallery of telescopes.
I think you finally reached the point where you have more unitrons than you have cats.
Yes, finally. Although one doesn't have cats,
This is
cats
where we-
have you.
It's true. This is where we met, which is the campus of MIT. By the late 70s, I was back there as a postdoctoral fellow. But of course, that is where I'd done my studies. That was me when I was an undergraduate. It was the 70s. What can I say? And my master's thesis there was on the thermal models of icy satellites. I had a model written in Fortran on computer cards that predicted that icy moons should have thick ice crusts and then oceans underneath them. It was one of the first models that actually came out saying that.
I also wound up at MIT around the same time, but as a grad student. That's me. I was working on PhD in geophysics and tectonophysics. And my thesis advisor was Guy's postdoctoral advisor. He was his mentor as well. None other than Sean Solomon, who went on, among other things, to be the PI on the Mercury Messenger mission.
So every day I'd get up, walk across this painfully long bridge, especially painful in the wintertime, to go to my office, which was on the 5th floor with a view of the river at the Green Building, which is not green, you'll notice, at MIT.
I, however, being a lowly undergrad, had an office facing the ugly downtown of Cambridge. But we did manage to meet.
And I think we actually met walking home across the bridge because we were both living on the Boston side of the river. I had an interesting crisis about that time. I was turning 30 and oh my gosh, not a kid anymore. And I would walk back and forth wondering, why am I wasting my life, worrying about oceans and the moons of Jupiter when there are people starving in the world? And I didn't have an answer for that. So finally, fed up with the whole life of science, I decided I was going to quit science and I was going to go to Africa. I joined the US Peace Corps, where immediately they had me at the University of Nairobi teaching astrophysics to graduate students.
Meanwhile, my research led me to all sorts of places, little islands in the West Pacific where everybody was in loincloths. I didn't go that far, I just wore cut-off jeans. And also, this is a picture of me with a field party in Western Pakistan near the Afghan border. Needless to say, after 2001, that's not a place I was going back to. But we both wound up wandering quite a bit. And somehow, when you're in remote places, it gets dark. So everywhere I went, I at least had binoculars.
The crazy thing that happened to me was as soon as I joined the Peace Corps, I realized I had made a terrible mistake because I'm a nerd and very much a stay-at-home, and having adventures was something I'd much rather read about. I mean, my idea of a great vacation is a cabin in the woods where it's raining outside so I can stay indoors and read a book. And finally, I was getting so homesick and so, what am I doing here? That I made the decision. This was still during training. I made the decision. I was going to tell them tomorrow morning, send me home. I'm not cut out for this. I'm just too homesick. I was to the point of being physically ill. But I thought, before I leave Kenya, I want to at least see the Southern Cross. So I pulled out my copy of, H.A. Ray, found that in December, the Southern Cross would be rising at about 4 a.m. And so I went outside, and sure enough, looking due south, there I could see just on the horizon the two bright stars reaching up from the left to the right of Alpha and Beta Centauri, or Beta and Alpha, and then the Southern Cross. I had fulfilled my ambition for being in Africa. I could go home. There was nothing else left to do. Turning around and going back to where I was sleeping, I noticed also at that time on the horizon, there's the Big Dipper, and there's the handle, and you could arc to Arcturus and spike to Spica, and offsetting in the west were the Summer Triangle, and rising in the east were all of the winter constellations. And then directly overhead, of course, was Leo the Lion, and I counted at that point 15 first magnitude stars. including some that I had never seen before. But more to the point, I suddenly realized because I knew the sky, I was at home. There was no need to be homesick. There was no need to actually have to go back to America. I was there and I was delighted to be there. And no place in the world has ever felt, away from home ever since. As it turns out, they'd shifted my job from being teaching in a high school to teaching at the university, and they gave me a month off to go back to America, pick up all the books that I was going to need for the classes I'd be teaching at graduate school level. And while I was there, I stayed with Dan and Leonie, who at this point were postdocs outside of New York City.
So I knew the guy was going to Kenya, right on the equator, all these stargazing opportunities. So we dragged him into the city where we made him buy this lovely little Celestron C90. Oh, there it is,
Still behind me.
That is a very, very traveled telescope. Originally, it came with the 0.965 inch eyepiece. So you have to have an adapter to use modern ones. Lovely little telescope. And I threw books at him because Guy knew the sky pretty well, but he's an astronomer. And astronomers, fundamentally, they observe by being in a room and plugging in numbers and the telescope points somewhere. They're kind of like, I'm a geologist, geophysicist. People give me rare mineral samples and I don't know what they are. You take your typical astronomer and put them in the dark sky and they can't find all that many deep sky objects. So I gave him these books.
Well, the trouble was not only that I couldn't find them, but that even if I could find them out of a table like this, I would have no idea which were the ones that were worth looking for and which were the ones that, they're not going to be able to be seen in the 3-inch, much less, how to find them. Because going back to H.A. Ray, I was confronted with the no need for this on one side, when really all I wanted to do was to be able to say, look, there's Arcturus. I had this book from when I was a kid. I had gotten this in the 4th grade. And I thought, why isn't there a book like this, but for amateur astronomers who have a small telescope like mine? I mean, when I bought the telescope, Dan immediately set it up in their backyard. You could see the George Washington Bridge. So I thought, we're in the middle of the city. We can't possibly, but we could. He pointed me to Alberio. He pointed me to a couple of other things that I never knew were there and so easy to see. We needed a book that could do this. At least I needed the book since I couldn't take Dan back with me. So I proposed to him, let's write a book like the stars, only for small telescope users who will show it like it is.
So I was at this point a new faculty member. The last thing I needed was a major task to divert me from tenure. I thought, boy, this sounds like fun, but just much too much work. My wife, being level-headed, basically told me, don't worry, you'll never get a contract. That's not how it happens. And I was really quite reassured by that. Oops.
So I knew enough about writing, my dad was a writer, that you write proposal letters. So I wrote a proposal letter to a couple of major publishers, and most of them ignored me. Random House came back with this very wonderful rejection letter. And it had the best advice I'd ever gotten for writing a book. Go to the local bookstore, see who does that kind of book, and submit your proposal to them. It turns out Charlotte Mayerson, who wrote this letter, was a big name in publishing. I had no idea. So I went to the bookstore and found that lots of books were being published by Sky Publishing, which is Sky and Telescope. So I wrote to them and they said, well, actually, we're just rebranding books that are coming out of Cambridge University Press. So I wrote a letter to Cambridge University Press in London. And this was their reply. They actually loved the idea of a book called Elementary Observational Astronomy that wasn't kind of the title we'd given them. They did have one fear.
The idea of color photographs. The whole point of what we wanted to do was not to have color photographs that looked like they were made from some massive observatory with a long exposure. We wanted to show people what it would actually look like, so that even if you're a beginner, not only can you find an object, but when you get there, you know that that's what you're seeing, because the drawing you see is what you see in the eyepiece, not some color photograph.
Well, Dan decided that the only way to do this was to make hundreds of object drawings using my telescope and his telescope, the ones that we had, the one he grew up with and the one I had taken to Africa.
So this led to a wonderful situation. Oh, sorry, dear, I have to I have to go out this evening and spend a lot of time at the telescope making drawings. I know, it's really rough. It was so much fun to visit all these old friends. And of course, in order to winnow down the list, you have to observe a lot more than you're going to end up with. So we made these templates for finder scope views and telescope views, and just gathered them together and gradually came up with a list of the friends we most want to introduce new friends to.
And the whole point was to draw the drawings, because in a telescope, it looks like that, not like that. So Dan went to work putting together not only all the observing, but assembling all the data that we could put into what are you looking at. Dan is the sort of person who thinks that anal retentive ought to have a hyphen.
Yeah, I mean, I can get a little over the top. So I had, if you look carefully at what's on right, that was clearly made with one of those dot matrix printers, the kind that sounds like a cat that's either amorous or in pain. But from all of these resources, I would pull together information about an object, and then being me, I would then go from first principles, calculate the values and make sure that they got them right, until we had something from which it was possible to craft an introduction to that object.
So my job then was to take all of that data and turn it into text. We were using the early Macintosh with a program called Ready, Set, Go, which allowed you to do layouts. But of course, we knew this wasn't going to be the final print, but at least gave us a sense of how much space we had. So I would write, and then I guess, how did we actually get these? These were physically passed on back and forth through the actual mail, because we certainly could not have done this through email back in the late 80s. And Dan would then annotate.
Yeah, annotate is a generous word for be snarky. Guy is actually a very gifted writer. I'm a competent writer, but a really, really, really meticulous and often annoying editor. I was used to it because I had grad students, and I did unto Guy what I would do unto my grad students, often in a rather snarky sort of way.
So this was one of the wonderful pages where I talk about something being subtle, and your comment was, it tiptoes while it turns. On a dark night, you can see the spiral arms, and you just answered, with what? But eventually we worked out text. The basic technique was I'd write something, he would complain, I would ignore him, he would complain, and if he complained 3 times, then I would finally fix it. But it kept both of us honest. And eventually the layout of the pages looks something like this. This is from a later edition, but the basic pieces are all here. You've got the title, you've got a naked eye view of the stars nearby, and a circle around where we're looking. And then the finder scope, that circle is the field of view of the finder scope on my C90. That's what we used as the standard. The stars in and out in case you had a bigger finder scope or you weren't quite pointed in the right direction yet. And these were there mostly to guide where you're trying to look. But then Dan takes over.
So then the question is, how do you let people know what to expect to see and what they're looking at? Well, it does not look like that. M8 and NGC 6530 don't look like that. They look more like this. Of course, this is inverted, the stars being black, but that's more what it looks like.
And you can see examples of this on a number of our favorite objects. There's the double cluster. That's a photograph of the double cluster. Notice the red stars. To you, Dan.
So here, this, obviously in the case of stars, it's easier to draw. I'm not a world's great, I'm not a very good artist, but I can draw dots and smudges. Well, you don't need smudges here, but you notice little circles around some of those stars. That's our way of saying that they're red. And as you may know, the stars, there being red stars in these clusters gives clues about their evolution and age, which then we discuss in the text. While we're here, by the way, each object, we've got little Michelin guide ratings and telling you whether it needs to be dark skies or steady skies and things like that for each object. So you know what time of year and what kind of conditions to look.
Now, you'd think it'd be very easy to do a field like this. You just basically map all the stars from some planetarium program. It's not the same, because what the human eye sees as a bright or a faint star is different from what a photograph is going to see as a bright or faint star, because the human eye's response to color is different. And that meant that Dan actually went and made the dots bigger and smaller in his field drawings, and then applied that to the drawing here. I guess you used a photograph underneath to make sure the positions were exactly right, but you could not use the photograph.
Yes,
you couldn't
can't use the photograph to show even stars what they look like, because if it's red or blue, it could be of the same magnitude overall, but it will look different to the human eye.
And this is one of everybody's favorites, the dumbbell. That's what it looks like in a photograph. And that's what you can expect. The other important thing to know is that these drawings are not meant to substitute for seeing it in the telescope. They're only there to make sure that you found the thing you thought you were looking for. Because in reality, if it's a good night, you're going to see more than that. And if you can, adapt a averted vision, or sometimes, imaginary vision, averted imagination, you can actually begin to see details that we're just hinting at in these drawings. But that was the whole reason why we did not want to use color photographs, besides the fact that it made the book cheaper. There was, however, one place where we did use photographs, and that's the moon. Because the cool thing about the moon is it does look like a photograph in a small telescope.
And the moon always
we had a lot of fun.
It always had a special place for me, because it was one of the things you could really see from my inner city neighborhood. And in fact, it has geology. I wound up going into geology, but the first geology I learned was the geology of the moon. I actually came into geology and geophysics from astronomy, in part because of the moon.
This did raise, of course, one problem we had. When you're talking about directions on the moon and you want to say, go from this crater and move west, or is it east? Most of us as astronomers know that the sky directions kind of look backwards, because as we say in the book, it's like you're in the barber's chair and you're looking at the word barber on the glass of the window, and it looks backwards because you're inside looking out. So what's east or west on the Earth is different from what's east or west in the sky. And naturally, the way you describe that is to have east and west, and except if you're a geologist.
Now, for a geologist, it's just natural. And I remember the moon was really the first object I could really see. I always thought of it geologically. If you're walking north and you turn right, you turn towards the east, not towards the west. So we had an ongoing debate about.
In fact, the first edition, we changed our minds at least once.
Yes.
And we had already written up the book and had people going west, and finally decided at the last minute, no, we'd better go east. So I went in, thankfully, this was
Go on.
This was, of course, allowed me to use the computer, the power of the computer, find east, change to west. No, that's not going to work, because then everything's west. Find east, change to ampersand. Find west, change to east. find ampersand, change to west. And I was so proud of myself for being clever enough to not fall into that terrible trap. And then
we were doing a final proofread, and we saw this sentence. At full moon, as the sun is setting in the east, the moon is rising in the west. Oops.
Oops. That was one of the mistakes we actually caught. There were a few that lingered for a while. One of the other things we wanted to do in the book was, of course, give people a general idea in the sky where the constellations were for people who didn't have, the stars by H.A. Ray. And for that, I wanted something that would look like a dome, but then I needed something to indicate where the bottom of where the ground was and where the sky was. And at the time, this was before I was a Jesuit, I was dating somebody who was an artist. I thought, great, I can hire her to draw these drawings. So she prepared a couple of these drawings. I showed them to Dan. Look, we've got these. These are great. And Dan's reaction, actually having met her, was understandable, was
these are just so sickeningly sweet. They look like Fraggles to me. And this is meant to be an astronomy book. People are supposed to be looking at the sky, not at, cute little critters. So I was appalled. I basically
we removed about half of the Fraggles because
no rabbits, nothing.
It was a very crowded scene. The other problem was that, as you've heard, I'm a Jesuit brother. Obviously, the relationship didn't work out, and that's fine. But as it was deteriorating rapidly, we still had 2 more pictures we needed to get out of her. And so I was very polite and biting my tongue all the time as I was trying to just get her out of my life and forget about all of this. We did eventually get the pictures.
Recognizing the situation Guy was in, I kind of bit my tongue on this, but the Fraggles and the little cute little critters kept on rankling.
We also had to figure out what we were going to put on the cover, just to make suggestions to the publisher.
The one on the left, the one on the left is a perfect example of why you don't have a geophysicist design a book cover. Really bad.
Fortunately, we had another artist working with us who was Dan's niece, who was, 16 at the time?
Yep. This was her first, she did a number of illustrations in the book, including a key part of the first cover. And she's kept on and off with artwork. In fact, right now she's in the process of doing an illustrated children's book.
So this was the cover that, taking our ideas, that Cambridge Press came up with. And I've always loved the Orion and the words pointing to the left. It's a theme that they've continued through all of the different covers. But of course, this raises the other question, why and how did we come up with the title, Turn Left at Orion? So, Dan, can you explain?
Well, this is something where neither one of us, I think, has a completely reliable memory of it because it was a back and forth. But one of the many objects that I thought was really fun to include was a lovely little triple star, Beta Monoceratus, with a nice open cluster near it. But it's in the constellation of the Unicorn, which is basically a big hole in the sky between Orion and Sirius. It's rather hard to find. So at one point we were discussing, well, basically, what do you do? Oh, well, you kind of go to Orion and turn left. And my recollection is we kind of looked at each other and said, ooh.
That's the title. Well, the book came out. Cambridge Press published it in England, priced it in pounds, and immediately forgot about it. They actually had made a few mistakes, including getting the words and the moon on the moon offset. So the words actually, the names of the craters weren't actually close to the crater. On the inside flap, they had a bit that said, this is a perfect book to use in the Southern Hemisphere. How they could have come up with that, we have no idea. And in those days, we're talking 1989, 1990, in those days, Barnes & Noble would not sell books that cost more than $25. And when they priced it in pounds and imported it into America, the price came out to be $27. So essentially, the book was going to die. But also about this time, I decided to enter the Jesuits and was actually at a meeting in Europe, ran into our editor, Simon Mitten, and announced to him that I would, had joined the Jesuits. And I got a very surprised look from him because what I did not know, he was one of that rarity of rarities in England, a left footer, which is to say a Roman Catholic. And he knew other Jesuits and he was friends with them and immediately said, oh, let's take over the book and do it right and correct all the mistakes and reprice it. And you could. And so the second edition came out and it was a phenomenal success. Of course, the other thing that happened was that Amazon came along right about then. So if the word of mouth had told you that the book was a good book, but you didn't know how to get it, you could always get it at Amazon.com.
Yeah, they were, Cambridge Press is so improved, but they were at the time a very, very stuffy, very British sort of outfit. On the inside jacket was something declaring that the right to publish all manner of printed material was granted by His Majesty King Henry VIII. And it was, all very pompous, and they were not into things like advertising. What the advertising that happened for us was in astronomy clubs. The number of people who I've come across who said, oh, I joined an astronomy club and somebody in the club recommended the book. Or
actually, I actually got along well with Simon. Dan less so. I think he reminded you too much of your father-in-law, seeing as your wife is British. Anyway, about 1996, I had a chance for another adventure for someone who doesn't like to travel. Being the meteorite curator at the Vatican Observatory, the Vatican's meteorite collection was now in my hands. I volunteered to go on a meteorite hunting trip to Antarctica. And before going to Antarctica, you fly to New Zealand. Well, here I was going to be someplace really far south. So, of course, I took my little telescope with me, left it in New Zealand while we collected the meteorites in Antarctica. It's kind of a crazy thing for an astronomer. The two things you know about astronomy is you wait till it's dark and you look up, and I spent 3 months where it never got dark, spending the entire time looking down. But came back and I had a week's vacation, went to a little place in the South Island called Lake Tekapo, because I knew that I needed to see all the stars that we hadn't seen before. The book only covered the stars on the left, but I wanted to see the stars to the south. As H.A. Ray put it, when you get to the Southern Hemisphere, you may never see the Dipper, but you'll see some other amazing things. My first night at the bed and breakfast, I went out and looked, and there was my old friend, the Southern Cross again, except the two stars, Alpha and Beta Centauri, looked wrong. When I was in Africa, they were on the left. Now they're on the right. What's going on? Until I realized we are so far south that these stars are circumpolar. And I was seeing them at the bottom of their round around the South Pole, not the top. Well, I quickly took a look. I had a list of like 12 things that a friend of mine had said, you got to see. I spent the next week enjoying myself, seeing amazing things and trying desperately to describe to Dan. I had a couple of sketches. This was something I was trying to do to give you a sense of what was going on. I knew we had to include Southern stars in the next edition. But if we're going to do a next edition, we're going to need some new drawings. So we're going to have to get rid of the Fraggles finally, because we needed new drawings for the Southern, looking left and looking right, or looking south and north. In addition, Cambridge had come back to us saying, we like the old cover, but it's a very funereal blue. It looks very gloomy. Can you come up with a cover that's got a little more color? Well, I was not talking to the old girlfriend anymore, but I had a friend from my science fiction connections, Marilyn Skirvin, who draws really cool animals and dragons, and also thought this would be great. So I went to her at one of these conventions around and said, can you draw us a cover for our new edition? And she looked at me and she goes, I don't draw people that well. I mostly draw animals. Well, how about, imagine this, a scene with a tent and a couple of feet sticking out and a bunch of woodland animals looking through our book, and bunny rabbits looking through the telescope. And we sort of worked out right then what the cover was going to look like. and she gave us a first draft of it. And with great frenzy, I showed this to Dan. I was so pleased. This was just such an inviting cover, I thought.
I was appalled. I didn't want cute little critters. I didn't want cute little raccoons and bunny wabbits and things like that. This is an astronomy book. So we had a little bit of a back and forth on it. And in the end, I thought that I'd won.
So she went back, and instead of drawing people, she did a silhouette of people. This was her cousin and his daughter. And the red sunset suddenly gave the color to the book that Cambridge wanted. So between the silhouette and the design of the book, it turned out really, really nice. Dan was happy. I was happy. Cambridge was happy.
And then I got a look at the finished book. And
the author's copy that you finally got.
The author's copy, and there it was, a wabbit.
This was such a design idea of Mary Lynn's that, in fact, Cambridge Press started using this for all of their astronomy books, which is, I think, a real compliment to her. However, as the years went on, we're now into the aughts, we realized that Dobsonian telescopes had changed the world. And there were now a lot of people who were using our book only with Dobsonians, and things in a Dobsonian are going to look very different from things in a Cat or a Metsukoff. So the first idea for the fourth edition was that we're going to need two at the telescope images, one so you know what you're looking at in a smaller telescope like mine, another so you have an idea of what you're looking at in a bigger telescope, a Dobsonian. So and that just meant bigger pages.
Yeah, so this had a number of implications. One of them is, obviously, bang for buck, number of inches, people are going to be looking in Dobbs that are bigger, so you can see more, particularly deep sky objects. The other thing, of course, is because how things are flipped depends upon mirrors, the orientation will be flipped. So darn, I had to go out and do yet more drawing at the telescope. Poor me.
And we decided if we're doing that, we may as well do it right and go back to the Southern Hemisphere and have Dan draw it correctly. Because if that's the sky, we wanted to do more than just the things in the north. We wanted to be able to include north and south. And a couple of other things jumped out at us from this. First of all, recognizing that we were very boreal-centric, that is Aurora Borealis. We kept talking about winter and spring and summer, but in the Southern Hemisphere, it's just the opposite. We were including stars that were near the North Pole, along with stars that were actually south of the celestial equator. That, again, was not correct. So we redivided the book into 6 sections. And we knew we needed to go someplace with great southern dark skies. Well, being a Jesuit at the Vatican Observatory, I was flying about 100,000 miles a year back then. So I had a zillion frequent flyer miles. So I bought tickets for Dan and me to go to a place where we could stay in Australia for free, which happened to be the vineyard that the Jesuits own in Seven Hill, which is about 2 to 3 hours north of Adelaide. Wonderfully dark skies. I brought my telescope because, of course, it fits. And then we rode off to, we actually borrowed a telescope from the South Australian Astronomy Club, but we also rode off to a telescope dealer in Sydney saying we'd like to buy a telescope and have it shipped to this Jesuit retreat house. And they refused to sell us the telescope. The guy wrote back and said, "The Jesuits educated me. I'm donating the telescope." That thing you see, that little plaque on the side of the Dob there, that is his dedication to his favorite Latin teacher from when he was at the Jesuit high school in Sydney. So we set up, all set to be able to take a look at the beautiful southern skies. Well, there's the vineyard, there's a little church, and those were the skies we saw.
So during the day, we would watch it rain and occasionally watch kangaroos hopping between the vines. You can't do that in California. and then hope for something better at night, and night after night after night, it was the same story. The one thing about this place, though, in addition to being a dark place, and a retreat house, it's a vineyard. So on cloudy nights, there were some compensating positive aspects.
You notice the picture of the church in the back there. On the last day we were there, was probably a Sunday, I guess. We were in the church, and the pastor got up and said, "We'd like to say a special prayer of thanks to the 2 American astronomers who have single-handedly ended the drought here in Central Australia."
And boy, did we do a good job. Went from a drought to an extreme La Nina event, which led to extreme rainfall in Australia. This color-coded thing shows here that almost all of the continent was way, way far more than normal rain for an extended period of time, bracketing when we were there. It wasn't until a couple of years later that it became clear how exceptional this was. There are some spacecraft in orbit, Grace and Grail spacecraft, they can detect minor changes in gravity. It turns out that there was so much extra water in the Australian continent that they could detect its effect in gravity. And this is a plot of rising sea level because of global climate change. And right in that time period, the rise in global sea level was temporarily reversed. Why? Because of all of the water stored in Australia. We did such a good job at ending their drought that it was actually visible in global sea level.
So why was it so important to, see objects in the Southern Hemisphere? It's because objects in the Southern Hemisphere are incredible. You remember that little fuzzy picture that I tried to draw? This is a photograph of the Eta Carina complex with the Keyhole Nebula. And this is the drawing that Dan was able to come up with.
There's just so much there. And this is only one object, a spectacular object. Look at the telescope readings there, our sort of Michelin scale. And notice quite casually, in Carina, Eta Carinae, and the Keyhole Nebula, and 4 nearby open clusters. That's all just one spread, because right there, there's just so much richness in the deep sky. They got the better half of the sky by far.
They do have the best globular cluster in the sky, and the second best, and the third best, and arguably the fourth best. This is Omega Centauri, which you can see from the Texas Star Party or from Tucson when the conditions are just right and just pops above the horizon. But to get a sense of what this looks like in the telescope, again, here's Dan's drawing.
It's just astonishing. You can actually partly resolve this thing in a finder scope. It really puts the great globular cluster in Hercules, M13, to shame. It's an extraordinary.
Of course, if you're bored with this, you can look at 47 Tuc, which is almost as spectacular. And there's a globular cluster most people don't even know about in Pavo, which is a part of the sky that's blank even to the Southern Hemisphere, but a lovely, sweet little globular. And of course, the ones in Sagittarius, you can see much better because you're that much further south. And then there's the Magellanic Clouds. And these are just unbelievable. We could not find any book that did justice to the Magellanic Clouds, but look at the number of ratings we got there. We go from 1 to 4, and this gets a 5 in whatever you're looking at. That's the finder scope view, but we divided it into 4 different sections just because it was too big to actually cover all of it. And just in that one section, there's the photograph. Can you believe it? Any one of those would be worth a look in the Northern Hemisphere. And I can't even count how many there are in that drawing.
And it's all of that in one. This circle is an ordinary telescope field. To see that many diverse objects in one field, it's just truly astonishing. If you ever get a chance to go down under, you just got to do it.
Bring at least binoculars. So we got a new edition. We're going to need a updated cover. So I went back to Mary Lynn, and she went back to her cousin. The daughter has now grown, so you can see she can handle the telescope by herself. We've now got a friend, John Ridley, who's looking through a little Dobsonian there. And we do have one other development. The bunny now has bunnies. Finally, about 2 years ago, we were asked by Cambridge to come up with an updated version. And there are a lot of things we wanted to just change and tweak. For one thing, there are a lot of star names that have changed officially by the IAU. We wanted to keep that going. There were a lot of mistakes that we wanted to make sure we corrected. We also, in particular, wanted to redo the planets chapter, because previously we were telling you where to find the planets, but we realize now most people can actually do that online. We basically wanted a better description of what to look for and less worry about how to find it. Though I really am kind of pleased with how this description of where you find Jupiter and Saturn as they move through the constellations. Dan had a great fun doing this, basically talking about Uranus, Neptune, asteroids, comets, and Pluto. You actually got to see Pluto, right?
Oh, yeah, a number of occasions.
And the point is that there's no way that a book could tell you where to find it, but there's no need for the book to tell you that now, because most people can find that and make their finder charts for their particular location, their particular time online. What they need is a sense of what to look for and what's cool and what isn't. There was something else that Dan pointed out, though, and that could only be handled by having extra resources online.
So when you're looking with the naked eye, of course, say you're looking south, west is to your right, the little arrow shows the direction the stars move. But depending upon the number of mirrors in the optical aid you're looking through, things are going to be flipped or rotated in different ways. And the way we had it, no matter how you choose to orient your drawings or your finder scope view, you're going to leave somebody, wanting to be out there with a mirror, either turning the book upside down or with a mirror to flip it. This really didn't seem to make a lot of sense. So this was a good opportunity to make use of web resources. And so what we've got a website that parallels the book with all sorts of extra resources for the moon, which is a new expanded section with a whole bunch of things by time of the month to look at, things about the planets, and lots of additional information about individual objects. So, for example, if you go to M13, what if you're in the southern hemisphere? Your naked eye view is upside down. What if you're using a different kind of finder scope? It's going to be flipped or turned over. A different kind of telescope. So on the website, you can click on one of these and get alternative finder scope views, depending upon the type of finder scope, and alternative telescope views, because some catoptrics are bigger and you see more. Some Newtonians are smaller and you may see not as much, but it's flipped the way a Newtonian would because of the two mirrors.
The other great thing that's happened that is a sign of success of this book is that it has been translated into a number of languages. The first was Italian, and we actually did this with one of the Italian priests at the Vatican doing the translations for us. A Orion, svolta a sinistra, twist to the left. And funny thing happened. This is based on the second edition. He came to me and said, in English, do you people spell Betelgeuse differently? And I'm going, no, I don't think we do. And he says, well, in the book, everywhere it's spelled Betelgeuse, G-U-E-S-E, instead of G-E-U-S-E. We had this wrong, thanks to Search and Destroy. We had done it wrong everywhere in both editions, and no one had noticed until he was doing the Italian translation.
I was finishing up, I just finished being on a master's thesis defense in astronomy, and somebody came up and handed me a book and asked me to autograph it. I thought, what is this? And I looked at it. This was the first I knew of the Korean edition, which of course I can't read. The Italian one I can at least read as though it was French and move my hands a lot and amuse Guy. But the Korean one, you know, the only way I know is because of the charts. There was then another. Oh, sorry. We then
No, go,
the latest one is the Chinese edition. I had a friend translate this for me, and the title even turned out to be a problem because the whimsical "Turn Left at Orion" doesn't really work in Chinese. So the title translate as "Starry Sky Observation Pandect." I thought I had pretty good vocabulary. I didn't know what a pandect was. And so that's the prime translation. Alternative translations run a full range. Observation compendium, digest. The best ones coming closer in flavor are things like Gazing at the Starry Sky. Okay, the subtitle of it turned out pretty close to ours. And all this various other information on the front, that's fine. But then I asked him to go and look at where I assumed it must be our names. So he looked at that, and it translates as American Guy Consolmagno. Okay. Notice even in Chinese with characters, Consolmagno is a long name. Then American Dan Davis, authored. Now, my Chinese is non-existent, but there was one thing in this book I was able to read. It was my middle initial. Then the rest of it is the name of the translator, who it turns out is a quite accomplished astronomer who's done a fair amount of translation of articles, and his website says he's translated more than 100 articles and participated in the translation of a popular science book on astronomy. You're welcome.
So I guess that's us.
Yep. So in addition to that middle initial M, one other thing came through very clearly.
No rabbits.
No rabbits.
Oh, well. Anyway, thank you all for listening to our stories. And if there are any questions, let me know. Let us know, and we'll do our best to come up with crazy answers.
So thank you all. You can hear the virtual applause going, I'm sure. And my comment on the no rabbits, Dan, I'm sure that made there some sort of feeling of relief at finally seeing a cover without the animals in it. Now, I'm a wildlife photographer, so unfortunately the rabbits, I'd love to see an eagle flying across the sky on the book. So you wouldn't like my interpretations of it. So I did capture a couple of comments. Mike K from the chat says, Brother Guy and Dan, this is amazing. I cut my teeth into your book, or I cut my teeth on your book, and your book helped propel me further into the hobby. So you've one more soul that you've given the gift of astronomy to. Jim.
Well, I've got a comment. I got a comment on that. At the University of Arizona, where I spend part of the year, and that's where I am right now. Of course, big astronomy department. And a kid recognized my name and came up and said it was thanks to that book that he had gone into astronomy as his major. And he was now getting a PhD in astronomy. And I'm thinking, oh, please don't blame me. I know how tough it is being a PhD student. It's not my fault.
Well, that I guess I'll think about that too then. Let's see. We have Jim Waddell who mentions, these are all comments. Stargazing is a way of becoming a child, discovering wonders previously unknown to myself. And I think
Absolutely.
we all agree, especially with you two having a chance to have gone into the Southern Hemisphere. That's something that's still on my bucket list. So
got to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to work on it. We can get some travel approved soon. Dave New says stargazing doesn't make it rain, but if you stargaze, it will rain. So I think we all agree with that. Harmony Smurf, who is in Seven Ponds Astronomy Club here, she owns the 3rd edition, also says thanks for the show. Jim Mishnowitz says thank you. Chris Nickel, thank you, gentlemen. Applause from John Hayworth. Samer Hariri says thank you for a wonderful book, and I believe he just got it from Amazon. Michael Williams, love it. Thanks for sharing. Mike K, keep the rabbits coming. Sorry, Dan. And the next edition will probably have rabbits back on it. Alan Salmi, I better buy the book now. So, and count me in as one of those. I think earlier Jim Forrester, that you may know, mentioned that he had the book and it's an excellent read. Yeah. Let me keep going right quick. I've got a couple more minutes. Michael Williams, our daughter is just over 1 now, meaning she'll be introduced to astronomy. It's time for astronomy. William Jensen, thanks much. Someone else who's logged in under our account, a lot of fun, great story, appreciate the book that much more. It may either be Jeff Kopmanis, who is working with us to put on this event, or it could be any of our other officers. So Jim Mishnowitz has a question. What are your most used telescopes now?
When I can get away, which of course in time of COVID is hard, when I can get away to do real serious stargazing, I go to a wonderful place called Cherry Springs that some of you may know of. And I bring my 14-inch Dob with me, but every once in a while, and I've got a wonderful Apo that I use in my backyard on planets and the moon, but every once in a while, just to bring myself back to when I started out, I take out that ancient Unitron 2.4-inch telescope that I got with the proceeds of the paper route. And it's there's something wonderful about visiting old friends, even with a small scope.
I use this guy still probably more. We actually have access to some other telescopes in Castel Gandolfo. When we did the 4th edition, we again had a telescope donated to us from Star Arizona. We had to pay for the shipping, which is, but it was great that they gave us the telescope. And so it was an 8-inch Dob, and I love using that in Rome. It's very easy to carry out. But I think the important thing is a telescope that's easy to set up is going to be used more than a telescope that may be optically better, but if it takes half an hour to set it up, you're just not going to get around to it. So last night, I've got this weird life where I'm half the year in Rome and half the year here, except for the virus. Now I'm here full time. And since I'm the director, I get emails starting from midnight. So I tend to wake up at 2 a.m. and read what emails. I get up at 2 a.m, read the emails, and then just walk outside with that guy. The sky brightness isn't great here in the center of Tucson, but you can certainly see, I saw the double cluster last night, saw Mars, which is just remarkable. And it's still my go-to telescope. Not that it's a go-to, it's the one that I go to.
So Jim Mishnowitz says, great that you still have that scope. And now I jump back up to, Michael Williams did say he can't wait to share the stars with his 1-year-old. Mary Oldani has pictures of bunnies, Dan. You would love it if you saw it, and says, great, great story and inspiring. Dave New asks, what is that menacing bush on the Chinese edition?
I don't know.
No idea.
And it does.
It's where the rabbits are
out here. We're about to eat this guy. Let's go, Judy Beck. Thanks very much, Brother Guy and Dan. I know we're running close to time, so I'll read through these as fast as I can. Again, one of our board members says, I have a nephew in Australia, and I have a ton of miles. I imagine if you're doing a lot of travel, you get a couple seats for free every once in a while, once international travel opens up. Jacob Caldwell, how difficult was it to travel by plane to your southern hemisphere locations. I can't imagine checking it as luggage or taking it as a carry-on. Must be
This telescope will this telescope would fit in my carry-on. Basically, I took the telescope in my carry-on, and I took the tripod in the checked luggage. And that seemed to be pretty good because, who's interested in, even though sometimes the tripods are more expensive than the telescopes. And then for the bigger telescopes, of course, we borrowed the one from the astronomy club and got the one donated from the dealer.
Yeah, I think it's helpful that your project, you weren't going for the huge scopes. You were using small scopes that are portable, easy to use. And for instance, once I get your book and I have a pair of binoculars, I'm thinking book, binoculars, let's go. So that's on the list. Let's see, Harmony Smurf, aren't bunnies good luck? And Dave New responds cats. So I think for Dan Davis doesn't think either one is good luck.
Well, my cats like the rabbits that are near our house, and sometimes bring them into the house in unfortunate conditions.
Yeah. So Dale Theme comments in. He just checked. He has a rabbit on his copy, the 3rd edition, and says great presentation. Apparently the bunny is very popular. If nothing else, we've all learned that bunny rabbits are awesome. Sorry, Dan, this isn't going your way.
It was a great joke that Guy pulled on me. I have to say, I really enjoyed that.
So yep, I've got my other presentation, but I will read these final comments. John Panuto has the 4th edition. Could not imagine being without it. We have a quick question for what do you both recommend for a starting scope? Mary Oldani has a picture of a scope. Jacob Caldwell, thanks, great talk. And Chris Nickel, my book signed by you, brother Guy, at the 2018 Great Lakes Stargaze. I value as much as my 10-inch Dobsonian. And Alan Salmi gives an answer to the question. For starters, look up the Galileo scope. And Jim says, I think in China, rabbits equals good luck in the moon. So I've got all the comments right quick. I will give it 2 more minutes to answer the question. What do you recommend for a starter scope? And then
ask your local astronomy club.
Great answer.
They're the people who know you and who know the local skies and know the local dealers. Join the astronomy club and ask them.
I absolutely agree, because it depends. The ideal telescope for you depends on what your local skies are, how physically large you are, and how much storage space you have for a telescope. You do not want a small person in a city with an 8-inch Dob, as inexpensive as they are. That doesn't make sense. But a larger person out in the country with a garage can pull it out. It might make sense.
All right. So let's give everyone out there, just in your comfort of your own room.
Thank you all.
Applause. Thank you, Dan Davis and brother Guy. We will go ahead and I'm going to ask everyone, don't forget to check out the other events. I think my event with Dolores Hill is getting started. We sent someone there to cover for me so that I can join in a little later. And there are other events. I'm going to post a survey in the chat and shut down the live view. Thank you again, brother Guy and Dan Davis. Thank you all for joining the live chat and watching. I think we had around 80 or so viewers. And of course, because this is recorded, more will watch the presentation long after this live presentation is done. So thanks again to both of you, and have a safe, pleasant evening. Check out, if you're online and checking out any of our other events, that would be awesome. We promise no rabbits will be harmed in the making of those events. They may not show up either. So that covers for the both of you. All right. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.